Good evening, stalwarts. Give yourself a round of applause for sticking all the way through. So my job is just in the last few minutes to wrap up, and what I'd like to do is just leave you with some general thoughts about what I observed, hopefully consistent with what you observed. If it's not, it's okay. I think we'll all bring a different perspective to the work and what we heard today. You know, a session like this is a little frustrating because it's simultaneously too much and too little. You sort of feel like we packed way too much into the day, and at the same time like we barely scratched the surface. And I think that's how it's meant to be when you get into something as rich as this. So let me just touch on a few highlights. I can't do this without acknowledging at the front end what was simultaneously the funniest and meanest tweet of the entire conference, which was a photo of our mayor. I wish he was here because I could do this then in front of him, but a photo of our mayor in his sweater that said, "I am not Ken Bone." That was just priceless and started us in style because it just shows the mood of the group. Be careful. But I also loved how the mayor opened this. You know, he sort of threw down the gauntlet with that video of his, that Pittsburgh, if it's not for all, it's not for us. It was the right theme, I think, for the day and the right challenge. And what we saw actually in quick succession was a number of reminders about the long-term consequences of getting this moment that we're in wrong. So Heinz sharing the video that he did, and you gotta love that video, and the self-importance of the announcer talking about how the city elders, city fathers, of course, had completely reinvented the city, and how proud they were of things that we now, looking back upon it, say, gee, we wish they hadn't done that. It's a reminder, I thought, a great reminder of the reason for humility as we approach this work. And the things that we all think we know for sure are things that maybe we ought to pause and reflect on. We heard Richard Jackson talk about that in terms of how social policy, how urban planning and urban design are actually social policy written into concrete. So the long-term consequences of getting it wrong have solid manifestation in our community. And John Wallace did such an amazing job, as he always does, in reminding us of the stakes of who we're fighting for and what happens to real people if we get it wrong. Just that one statistic, about 62% of the African-American children in the city being in poverty, compared to about 15% of white children. Extraordinary disparity that cannot stand. So then we got, coupled with this reminder about the long-term consequences of getting it wrong, I think a number of calls to action, and they were all, I think, inspiring and amazing, none, though, quite as powerful as Jaziri X's incredible piece. And I love his phrase. I love a whole bunch of the phrases in there, but this notion of bound to resist will stick with me, that there is a need, an impulse to resist the status quo and what we are experiencing and seeing. Ta-Nehisi Coates, in his book Between the World and Me, uses a phrase that the universe favors verbs over nouns. And I think that was the message, in a way, of Jaziri X's performance piece. But it was the message, too, of Mayor Greg Fisher's presentation. You know, he spent a lot of time talking about compassion, but what he was really talking about was engagement around compassion. And his admonition to not be a couch from the critic, I hope, is one that we'll take into the community with us. Latasha Mays, I think, reminded us of a way in which we may not think about environmental challenges from a justice standpoint, but that too was part of our call to action today. As we built on that call to action, Angela Glover Blackwell, in the beautiful poetic way that she always does, reminded us of this core concept, that place really matters. So this place that we're fighting for, this notion that we call Pittsburgh, really matters. And her idea, rooted in data, that where you are born and where you live is a proxy for opportunity in our community is one we should remember as we go back out into the community after tomorrow. I loved in this context as well Karen Abrams, and by the way, it was so great to have her back in town. But the same reminder from her about the importance of place. Now, what we're reminded of as well, though, by our speakers is that even as we're thinking about the importance of place and the value of preserving what's unique about Pittsburgh, there's a lot of discussion about how we have to put people at the center of that. And I'll remember a lot of what our speakers said. Majestic Lane talking at length about putting people at the center of neighborhoods, if that's how we want to see them reinvented, putting kids at the center. There was a lot of energy on Twitter around that. Angela Blanchard, though, with a couple of comments that she made will really stick with me in this context for a while. She talked about how the measure of a great city is who it welcomes. What a lovely idea, that it's not just who's there, but who we welcome. That's a reflection of us. And also her admonition to never make the place more precious than the people. So let's take that. Even as we're remembering the importance of the place, let's take away this notion that the place doesn't matter more than the people who live there. So that's actually another theme that we saw come up a lot in these in the speakers' comments today, that the how we do this matters, that there is an art to doing this right. So when we think about how we want to fight this in Pittsburgh, that thinking about how we do it and the art of it is important for us. And I loved in that context Liz Ogbu's notion of moving from empower to co-power. So actually embracing the idea of sharing power. Angela Blanchard's lovely notion that the leaders that we need are already here. So often we go looking for different people to come in and lead us and lead the communities that we're working in, but they're already there. And I think just in a human context, the idea that we should be prepared to say, I'm sorry, even if we aren't the ones who have committed the wrong, but just to express that basic human connection around I'm sorry was a beautiful thought we should carry with us. There was some beautiful thinking that arrived here on the stage around the notion of data and design. So when we're thinking about how we do this work, the importance of data and the importance of design rose subtly through the ranks, I think, in the comments that we heard. Tim Dugan offered a bit of a master class for those of you who are paying attention about how we can rethink infrastructure. And I really wish that everybody in our community who's engaged with Alcosan and PWSA and the whole debate over what we're going to do with up to $4 billion of public investment in new sewer and water infrastructure would listen to this notion of how we can rethink it in a green fashion. Sepp Kamvar gave another master class in how to use design to rethink pretty much everything, but particularly rethink schools. And what a remarkable notion to turn so much of what we think we know about education completely on its head and use that not only to reinvent schools, but to reinvent interaction with cities. It was actually the takeaway for me from Kai Uwe Bergman's presentation about the Lower Hill and about Audi. We can make of those pieces what we will, but what he ultimately was talking about was how we use design to rethink connectivity. Really an important notion for us at this moment. And then Bruce Katz, he actually backstage decided, we're so far behind, I'm going to throw away my presentation, and I'm going to come out here and just talk with folks about what I think was important. Only he can pull that off the way that he did. But what he encouraged us to do from a design standpoint was to rethink social connectivity. So to put together the amazing resurgence of Pittsburgh that we're seeing around innovation and leverage that to connect the people in the community with it. I guess that covers it. Those were the highlights for me. Wonderful takeaways from the groups that we just heard from. We have fewer people in the room now than we did at the beginning of the day. This often happens with conferences, and I don't know who will show up tomorrow. The right people will show up tomorrow, and I'm going to invite you to be among the right people. The plan for tomorrow is to engage in the deeper conversations that the community actually asked us to include in this second iteration of P4. An opportunity for us to take the sort of ideas that I've just framed for you and everything else that you heard that I've missed and translate that into the action agenda we need for Pittsburgh. So I want to thank you so much for persevering through the agenda today, sticking with us and being here in the first place, and being here tomorrow as well. I will look forward to seeing you in the morning. Thank you.